The dust cloud rising from the road told Marianne Fletcher that trouble was coming long before she could make out the shape of her brother-in-law's wagon, barreling toward the homestead where she had been living for the past 3 months since her sister Catherine's funeral. She stood on the porch of the small house that had belonged to Catherine, her hands gripping the wooden railing until her knuckles turned white. It was June of 1878, and the Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly on the dry earth. Marianne had turned 21 just 2 weeks ago, and in that time she had buried her only sister, tried to keep the small ranch running, and avoided thinking about what would happen when Catherine's husband, Robert Henshaw, decided he wanted the property for himself. That day had apparently arrived. Robert pulled the wagon to a harsh stop in front of the house, causing the 2 horses to whinny in protest. He climbed down with the jerky movements of a man who had been drinking, though it was barely noon. His face was red and bloated, his eyes small and mean, in a way that made Marianne's stomach twist with fear. "Get your things," he said without preamble. "You are leaving today." Marianne forced herself to stand tall, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "This is my home now. Catherine left it to me in her will." Robert's laugh was harsh and ugly. "There is no will. Catherine had nothing to leave. Everything belonged to me, and it still does, including this house and the land it sits on." "That is not true," Marianne said, trying to keep her voice steady. "She told me herself that she had papers drawn up. She wanted me to have a place after she was gone." "Show me these papers, then," Robert sneered, climbing the porch steps. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall and broad through the shoulders from years of ranch work. Marianne had never liked him, even when Catherine was alive. Her sister had married him 5 years ago when Marianne was only 16, and she had watched the light slowly die in Catherine's eyes as the years passed. "They are with the lawyer in town," Marianne said, though her confidence wavered. She had not actually seen the papers herself. Catherine had promised they existed, had sworn she had taken care of everything, but Marianne had no proof beyond her sister's word. "There are no papers," Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "And even if there were, you think any judge in this territory is going to give property to an unmarried girl over a woman's rightful husband. You are living in a dream, Marianne. Now get inside and pack your things, or I will throw you out with nothing but the dress on your back." Marianne opened her mouth to argue, but Robert grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. She tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. He dragged her toward the door, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath mixed with sweat and something rotten. "You have been nothing but a burden," he hissed. "Catherine spent money on you that should have been mine, fed you, clothed you, gave you a roof over your head. Well, that is over now. You can go back to St. Louis where you came from, or you can find some other fool to take care of you. Either way, you are not staying here." Marianne twisted in his grasp, her free hand clawing at his fingers. "Let me go! You have no right!" "I have every right," Robert shouted, shaking her hard enough to make her teeth rattle. "This is my property, and you are trespassing." The sound of a horse approaching made them both freeze. Marianne turned her head to see a lone rider coming up the road at an easy canter. Even from a distance, she could tell he sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle, his posture relaxed but alert. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A tall man in his mid-20s wearing a brown hat, dusty clothes, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. His face was tanned and angular, with several days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. Robert released Marianne's arm and stepped back, but his expression remained hostile. The stranger reined in his horse, a beautiful paint gelding, about 10 feet from the porch, and touched the brim of his hat in a polite gesture. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was deep and calm, with a slight Texas drawl. "Sorry to interrupt, but I was told in town that this was the Fletcher place, and that Miss Marianne Fletcher might be looking for help with some ranch work." Marianne stared at him, confused. She had not put out any such request, and she did not recognize this man at all. But something in his steady gray eyes told her to play along. Yes, she said quickly before Robert could speak. Yes, I was. Are you looking for work? The cowboy nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to Robert in a way that managed to be both casual and assessing. Name is Caleb Thornton. I've been working ranches since I was 14, and I'm good with horses and cattle both. Heard you might need someone to help get things in order. Robert's face had gone from red to purple. She is not hiring anyone. This woman does not own this property, and she is leaving today. Whatever you heard in town was wrong. Caleb's expression did not change, but something shifted in his posture. He dismounted in one smooth motion and looped his horse's reins over the porch rail. Up close, he was even taller than Robert, though leaner, with the wiry strength of someone who made his living through hard physical work. That is not what the lawyer said, Caleb remarked mildly. Fellow named Harrison? He seemed pretty clear that Miss Fletcher inherited this place from her sister, Mrs. Catherine Henshaw. Said she had papers and everything? Marianne's heart leaped. Could it be true? Had Catherine really left documents that would protect her? Robert's jaw clenched. Harrison does not know what he's talking about. My wife had no authority to give away property that belonged to me. Arizona is a community property territory, Caleb said, his tone still conversational but with an edge of steel underneath. Which means Mrs. Henshaw had every right to dispose of her half however she saw fit. And from what Harrison told me, she made her wishes real clear before she passed, left everything to her sister, free and clear. You are lying, Robert spat. Harrison would never have discussed private legal matters with a stranger. Caleb shrugged. Maybe you should go talk to him yourself then. In the meantime, I have come a long way looking for work, and the lady here says she has some. So, if you do not mind, I would like to discuss the particulars with my new employer. The way he said employer left no doubt as to whose side he was on. Robert looked back and forth between them, his fists clenching and unclenching. For a long moment, Marianne thought he might try to fight, but apparently even drunk and angry, he recognized that Caleb was not a man to trifle with. This is not over, Robert snarled at Marianne. I will be back with the sheriff, and we will see what he has to say about you stealing my property and hiring gunmen to threaten me. I have not threatened anyone, Caleb said quietly, just stated some facts. But you are welcome to bring the sheriff by any time. I am sure Miss Fletcher would appreciate having a lawman confirm her legal rights. Robert's response was a string of curses as he stomped back to his wagon. He climbed up, jerked the reins hard enough to make the horses toss their heads, and drove off at a reckless speed that sent up another cloud of choking dust. Marianne watched him go, her whole body shaking with a mixture of relief and residual fear. When she turned back to Caleb, she found him watching her with those calm, gray eyes. Thank you, she said, her voice coming out more breathless than she would have liked. I do not know who you are or why you helped me, but I am grateful. Is it true? Did Catherine really leave papers? Caleb's expression softened slightly. I apologize for the deception, ma'am. The truth is I never spoke to any lawyer. I was riding through looking for work, and when I came past here, I saw a man manhandling a woman. Figured I should intervene. Marianne's stomach dropped. So there are no papers? No will? I do not know about that, Caleb admitted. But there is a lawyer named Harrison in town. I saw his shingle when I rode through. If your sister told you she left documents, seems like he would be the one to check with. I do not have any money to pay a lawyer, Marianne said quietly, or to hire you for that matter. I'm sorry you came out here for nothing. Caleb was quiet for a moment, studying her. Marianne was suddenly very aware of how she must look. Her dark brown hair coming loose from its pins, her dress faded and mended in several places, her face probably showing every ounce of the fear and exhaustion she felt. I was not entirely untruthful, he said finally. I'm looking for work. Been drifting since I left Texas 3 months ago, picking up jobs here and there. I can see this place needs attention. Fences need mending, barn could use some repairs, and I would bet you have got livestock that need tending. I will work for room and board until you can afford to pay me proper wages. If your brother-in-law comes back, you will want someone around anyway. Marianne blinked, surprised by the offer. You would do that? Work for nothing but meals and a place to sleep? I have done worse, Caleb said with a slight smile. And I am a fair hand at cooking, so you would not have to worry about feeding me fancy. Long as there's coffee and beans, I will make do. She wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some shred of pride and independence, but the truth was that she was terrified of Robert coming back, and even more terrified of trying to manage the ranch alone. Catherine had done most of the heavy work before she got sick, and Marianne had never learned half of what she needed to know. All right, she said finally, but I will pay you as soon as I'm able. I refuse to take charity. Caleb touched his hat brim again. Yes, ma'am. Should I put my horse in the barn and have a look around? Please, Marianne said. And Mr. Thornton, thank you for stopping him. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes, something dark and angry that was quickly hidden. Men like that only understand one thing, he said quietly, and it is not reason or decency. You did the right thing standing up to him, but you are going to need help if you want to keep this place. I know, Marianne admitted. I just do not know where to get it. Well, you have got one hand now at least, Caleb said. Let's start with that and see where it takes us. He led his paint toward the barn, leaving Marianne standing on the porch with her heart still racing and her mind spinning with questions. Who was this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere? Why would he risk angering Robert, who was known to be mean and vindictive for the sake of a woman he had never met? And most importantly, could she really trust him? But as she watched him disappear into the barn with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, Marianne felt the first small spark of hope she had experienced in months. Maybe, just maybe, she was not as alone as she had thought. The rest of that day passed in a blur of activity. Caleb emerged from the barn after settling his horse and proceeded to walk the property, making notes in a small journal he pulled from his saddlebag. Marianne followed him for a while, trying to explain what needed doing and what Catherine had managed before she got too sick to work. The chickens are in that coop over there, she said, pointing to a ramshackle structure near the house. We had about 20 hens, but I think foxes or coyotes got some of them. I've been finding fewer eggs each morning. Caleb examined the coop with a critical eye. This needs reinforcing, he said. Predators can squeeze through gaps smaller than you would think. I will patch it up tomorrow, and we should move the birds inside the barn at night until it is fixed proper. They continued on to the small paddock where Catherine had kept her riding horse and a mule. The horse was a sweet-tempered bay mare named Daisy, and the mule was called Sam. Both animals looked thin and rough, and Marianne felt a pang of guilt. She had been doing her best to care for them, but clearly her best was not enough. They need more feed, Caleb said, running his hands over Daisy's ribs. What have you been giving them? Whatever hay was left in the barn, Marianne admitted. I do not know where Catherine got it from or how much to give them. The general store in town will have feed, Caleb said. I will ride in tomorrow and see about getting some supplies. In the meantime, let's turn them out into that bigger pasture over there. They can graze and build up their strength. He was as good as his word. Within an hour, he had moved both animals to better grazing, fixed a broken board in the barn, and started a list of materials he would need for repairs. Watching him work, Marianne felt simultaneously grateful and inadequate. This man, this stranger, was doing more for her in one afternoon than she had managed in 3 months. As the sun began to set, she made a simple dinner of fried salt pork, beans, and cornbread. It was nothing fancy, but Caleb ate it like it was a feast, complimenting her cooking and asking for seconds. They ate at the small table in the kitchen, and Marianne found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. He had removed his hat inside, revealing thick, dark hair that was slightly too long and curled at his collar. His face was lean and weathered, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. When he smiled, which he did more often than she expected, it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less guarded. Tell me about your sister, he said after they had finished eating. If you do not mind my asking. Marianne was surprised by the question, but she found she did not mind answering. Catherine was 7 years older than me, she said quietly, After our parents died, I was 13 then. She took care of me, made sure I went to school, that I had clothes and food. She worked as a seamstress in St. Louis, and we had a small apartment. It was not much, but we were happy. What brought her out here? Caleb asked. Marianne's expression tightened. Robert, she met him when he came through St. Louis 5 years ago on a cattle drive. He was charming at first, told her about this beautiful ranch he owned in Arizona, how he was building something grand and needed a good woman by his side. Catherine was 23 and tired of struggling to make ends meet. I think she saw him as a way to have a better life. But it was not better, Caleb said. It was not a question. It was not a... No, Marianne agreed. The ranch was barely more than a homestead, and Robert was not the man he pretended to be. He drank too much, spent money they did not have, and blamed Catherine for everything that went wrong. But she tried to make the best of it. She wrote to me every month, always saying things were going to get better. When did you come out here? Last year, Marianne said. Catherine wrote and said she was not feeling well. She did not say how bad it was, but I could read between the lines. I used what little savings I had to buy a train ticket west. By the time I got here, she was already very sick. The doctor said it was consumption, that there was nothing to be done. She lasted 3 more months. I am sorry, Caleb said, and the sincerity in his voice made Marianne's throat tighten. She made me promise I would not go back to St. Louis, Marianne said. Said she had fixed things so I would be taken care of, that this place would be mine, and I could make a fresh start. I believed her. But now I do not know if she was telling the truth or just trying to give me hope in her last days. Caleb was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup between his hands. Tomorrow I will ride into town with you. We will find this lawyer Harrison and see what he knows. Even if there are no papers, there might be other options. Like what? Marianne asked. Adverse possession, maybe, Caleb said. If you have been living here and maintaining the property, you might have a claim even without a will. Or we could look into whether your brother-in-law actually owns the land free and clear. Sometimes men like him are in debt up to their eyeballs and just bluffing about their assets. Marianne felt another flicker of hope. You know a lot about the law for a ranch hand. Caleb's smile was wry. I have had some experience with land disputes. My family lost our ranch in Texas to a banker who used legal tricks to take it from us after my father died. I learned the hard way that knowing the law is just as important as working the land. Is that why you left Texas? Marianne asked. Something shuddered in Caleb's expression. Part of it, he said. Mostly I just needed a fresh start somewhere nobody knew me or my history. Arizona seemed as good a place as any. Marianne understood that feeling all too well. They cleaned up the dishes together in companionable silence, and then Caleb excused himself to bed down in the barn. He refused Marianne's offer of a room in the house, saying it would not be proper, and that he preferred the barn anyway. I have slept in worse places, he assured her, and this way I will hear if anyone comes nosing around during the night. Marianne watched him walk toward the barn in the gathering darkness, then went inside and barred the door. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe enough to sleep soundly through the night. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Marianne was up before sunrise, as was her habit, and she was surprised to find Caleb already working in the chicken coop. He had somehow found scrap wood and wire and was reinforcing the walls while the chickens clucked disapprovingly from their temporary enclosure in the barn. Morning, he called when he saw her. Coffee is on the stove. I took the liberty of starting a pot. Marianne went back inside and found that he had indeed made coffee, strong and hot. She poured herself a cup and stood on the porch, watching the sun rise over the desert hills. The land here was harsh and unforgiving, nothing like the green comfort of Missouri, but there was a stark beauty to it that had grown on her during her months in Arizona. After a quick breakfast of leftover cornbread and bacon, they saddled Daisy in Caleb's paint and rode into town. The settlement of Copper Springs was about 5 miles away, a collection of adobe and wooden buildings clustered around a main street. It was a typical Arizona Territory town, a general store, a saloon, a church, a hotel, and various other businesses serving the ranchers and miners who worked in the area. The law office of Samuel Harrison was tucked between the general store and the bank. It was a small building with a painted sign hanging above the door. Marianne dismounted and tied Daisy to the hitching post, her heart hammering with nervous anticipation. "I will be right here if you need me," Caleb said. But Marianne shook her head. "Come with me," she said. "Please, I would feel better having someone with me." Caleb nodded and followed her inside. The office was cramped but tidy, with law books lining one wall and a large desk dominating the center of the room. A man in his 50s sat behind the desk, his gray hair neatly combed and his spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up when they entered and smiled warmly. "Miss Fletcher," he said, rising to his feet, "I was wondering when you would come see me." Marianne stared at him. "You know who I am?" "Of course," Harrison said. "Your sister spoke of you often when she came to draw up her papers. I was very sorry to hear of her passing. Please sit down." Marianne sank into one of the chairs facing the desk, and Caleb took the other. Harrison resumed his seat and pulled a folder from a drawer. "Your sister came to see me 6 months before she died," he said. "She knew she was ill, and she wanted to make sure you would be provided for. She instructed me to draw up a will, leaving all her property to you, the house, the land, and all her personal possessions." "But Robert said there was no will," Marianne said. "He said everything belonged to him." Harrison's expression hardened. "Mr. Henshaw is either ignorant of the law or deliberately lying. Arizona is a community property territory, which means that property acquired during a marriage belongs equally to both spouses. The homestead was originally filed in both Robert and Catherine's names. Catherine had every legal right to dispose of her half as she saw fit. And that is exactly what she did." He opened the folder and pulled out several documents covered in dense legal writing. "This is your sister's last will and testament, properly witnessed and filed with the territorial court. It clearly states that her half of the homestead, 50% of the land and improvements, goes to you upon her death. The other half remains in Robert's name." Marianne felt dizzy with relief. "So I do own part of the ranch?" "You do indeed," Harrison confirmed. "And under territorial law, you have the right to live on the property and use it as you see fit. Mr. Henshaw cannot force you to leave or dispose of your share without your consent." "What if he tries?" Caleb asked quietly. "From what we saw yesterday, he is not the type to accept this gracefully." Harrison sighed. "Unfortunately, Mr. Henshaw has a reputation for being difficult. However, the law is on your side, Miss Fletcher. If he attempts to forcibly remove you or damage your property, that would be a criminal matter. I suggest you speak with Sheriff Garrett and make him aware of the situation." "Will Robert contest the will?" Marianne asked. "He can try," Harrison said, "but I do not think he will succeed. The documents are ironclad, and I have witnesses who can testify to your sister's state of mind when she signed them. She was fully competent and acting of her own free will." Caleb leaned forward. "What about buying him out? Could Miss Fletcher purchase his half of the property?" Harrison looked thoughtful. "In theory, yes, but that would require capital, and property values in this area are not cheap. Even a half share of a working ranch could cost several $1,000s. Several $1,000s might as well have been several million for all the chance Marianne had of raising such a sum. Still, just knowing that she had a legal right to stay was more than she had dared hope for. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," she said. "I cannot tell you what a relief this is. What do I owe you for your services?" "Your sister paid me in advance," Harrison said kindly. "She wanted to make sure there would be no obstacles for you. However, if Mr. Henshaw does cause trouble, I would be happy to represent you in court. We can discuss payment arrangements at that time." They left the office with copies of Catherine's will safely tucked in Marianne's saddlebag. The weight of the documents felt symbolic somehow, as if she was carrying proof of her sister's love and her own right to exist in this harsh land. "Feel better?" Caleb asked as they stood on the boardwalk. "Much," Marianne admitted, "though I'm not looking forward to the next confrontation with Robert." "Let's talk to the sheriff before we head back," Caleb suggested. "Get everything on record." The sheriff's office was at the far end of town. Sheriff Tom Garrett was a weathered man in his late 40s with a salt and pepper mustache and shrewd blue eyes. He listened to Marianne's story without interruption, occasionally glancing at Caleb with an assessing look. "I know Robert Henshaw. Garrett said when she finished. He's a hothead and a drunk, but I have never known him to get truly violent. That said, I will keep an eye on the situation. If he threatens you again, you come straight to me. And if I were you, I would make sure you are not alone at that ranch. A woman by herself is vulnerable, regardless of what the law says. She has me, Caleb said quietly. I am working for Miss Fletcher now, and I will be staying on the property. Garrett's eyebrows rose. That's so? I do not believe I have seen you around here before. I am new to the area, Caleb said. Name is Caleb Thornton, originally from Texas. I am just a ranch hand looking for honest work. Something in the way he said it made Marianne glance at him sharply, but his expression was neutral. Garrett studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Well, Mr. Thornton, I hope you are as good as your word. Miss Fletcher is going to need all the help she can get if she wants to hold on to that property. Robert Henshaw does not strike me as the type to give up easily. They made one more stop at the general store to buy supplies, feed for the animals, some basic foodstuffs, and materials for fence repairs. The storekeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Patterson, was full of gossip and sympathy when she learned about Marianne's situation. I always liked your sister, she said as she wrapped their purchases in brown paper. She had a hard life with that man, but she never complained. I'm glad she found a way to take care of you. By the time they rode back to the ranch, it was late afternoon. Caleb spent the rest of the day working on repairs while Marianne tended the chickens and started preparing dinner. She found herself humming as she worked, a habit she had lost during the difficult months of Catherine's illness. It felt good to have purpose again, to believe that she might actually have a future here. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. Caleb worked from dawn to dusk, tackling one project after another with quiet efficiency. He repaired fences, reinforced the barn, fixed the chicken coop, and started clearing brush from around the house to reduce fire danger. Marianne helped where she could, learning as she went. Caleb was a patient teacher, showing her how to mend tack, how to check the animals for injury or illness, and how to manage the vegetable garden that Catherine had planted behind the house. They fell into an easy rhythm with each other, their conversations ranging from practical matters to more personal topics. Marianne learned that Caleb was 26 years old, that he had two younger sisters who had married and moved to California after their family lost the ranch, and that he had spent the last 3 years drifting through Colorado and New Mexico before landing in Arizona. Do you miss Texas? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Sometimes, Caleb admitted. I miss what it used to be before my father died and everything fell apart. But you cannot go back to something that does not exist anymore. All you can do is move forward and try to build something new. Marianne understood that sentiment more than he knew. She had spent months mourning not just Catherine, but the life they might have had together, the dreams that would never come true. But sitting here with Caleb, watching the sky turn gold and purple, she felt those old griefs beginning to ease. Robert did not reappear for 10 days. When he finally showed up, he was not alone. He brought 3 men with him, rough-looking hired hands who sat their horses with the lazy menace of men accustomed to intimidation. Marianne was in the garden when she saw them coming, her stomach clenched with fear, but she forced herself to stand and walk calmly toward the house. Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression carefully neutral. "Morning, Robert," he called. "What brings you out this way?" Robert's face was already red with anger. "You know damn well what brings me. I want this squatter off my property, and I want you gone too." "Miss Fletcher is not a squatter," Caleb said evenly. "She owns half this property legally, as the sheriff and the lawyer can both confirm. And I work for her, which means I have every right to be here." One of the hired hands, a big man with a scar across his cheek, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Seems to me like you are both trespassing. Boss says leave, you ought to leave." Caleb's hand did not move toward his gun, but his stance shifted slightly, becoming more balanced. Marianne recognized it as the posture of a man ready for trouble. "I do not work for your boss," Caleb said quietly, "and neither does Miss Fletcher. Now you are all welcome to turn around and ride back where you came from, or we can go fetch the sheriff and let him sort this out. Your choice." The tension stretched taut as a wire. Marianne held her breath, terrified that violence was about to erupt. But after a long moment, Robert jerked his reins hard enough to make his horse toss its head. "This is not over," he snarled. "You think you are clever, hiding behind lawyers and that gun of yours, but I know ways to make your life miserable that have got nothing to do with the law." "That sounds like a threat," Caleb observed. "I am sure the sheriff would be interested to hear about it." Robert's response was another string of curses as he wheeled his horse around. His hired hands followed, though the scarred one kept looking back as if hoping for an excuse to start a fight. When they were gone, Marianne let out a shaky breath. That was terrifying. "But effective," Caleb said. "He is testing boundaries, seeing how far he can push. As long as we stand firm, he will eventually realize it is not worth the effort." "You really think so?" Marianne asked doubtfully. Caleb's expression was serious. "I think Robert Henshaw is a bully and a coward. He only fights battles he is sure he can win. Right now he is not sure, and that makes him dangerous. But it also means he's not going to do anything too reckless. He does not want to risk prison." Marianne hoped he was right. That night she lay awake in her small bedroom, listening to every sound outside. The wind in the mesquite bushes, an owl calling from somewhere nearby, the distant yip of coyotes. All of it seemed ominous and threatening. But as the days passed and Robert did not return, Marianne began to relax again. The ranch work continued, and she found herself growing stronger and more capable. Caleb taught her how to ride properly, how to rope a calf, how to read the signs of weather in the clouds. He was endlessly patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she got something right. One morning in early July, Marianne woke to find Caleb saddling both horses. "Thought we might ride out to the north pasture," he said. "I've been hearing cattle up that way, and I want to see if any of them belong to you." Marianne had almost forgotten about the cattle. Catherine had mentioned owning a small herd, but Marianne had not seen them since she arrived. They rode for about an hour through increasingly rough terrain, following dry creek beds and winding between rock formations. Finally, they crested a rise and looked down into a shallow valley where a dozen cattle grazed on sparse grass. "There," Caleb said with satisfaction, "looks like you have got about 10 cows and 2 bulls. Not a huge herd, but enough to build on if you manage them right." Marianne stared at the animals, a mix of emotions swirling through her. These cattle represented potential income, a way to make the ranch profitable, but they also represented more work, more responsibility, more things that could go wrong. As if reading her thoughts, Caleb said gently, "We will figure it out. Ranching is not easy, but it is not impossible either. You have got good instincts, Marianne. You just need experience." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made something flutter in her chest. She glanced at him and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done without you." Caleb looked away, but not before she saw color rise in his tanned cheeks. "You would have managed. You are stronger than you think." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them. Marianne found herself noticing things she had not paid attention to before. The way Caleb's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he worked, the low rumble of his laugh when something amused him. She told herself it was just gratitude, that she was confusing appreciation with attraction. But late at night, lying in her bed, she could not stop thinking about him, about the way he had stepped between her and Robert without hesitation, the way he listened when she talked about Catherine, the way he made her feel safe and valued. It was dangerous to feel this way. Caleb was an employee, nothing more. He had made no indication that he saw her as anything other than his boss. And even if he did, what kind of future could they have? She was barely holding on to this ranch, and he was a drifter who had admitted he was running from his own past. But feelings, Marianne was learning, did not care about logic or practicality. The summer heat intensified, turning the land into a furnace. They worked in the early mornings and late evenings, resting during the hottest part of the day. The ranch was starting to look better, fences repaired, buildings maintained, animals healthy. Marianne even managed to sell some eggs in town, her first actual income since arriving in Arizona. One evening in late July, Caleb suggested they ride into town for the monthly dance. Marianne was surprised by the invitation. She had not thought Caleb was the type to enjoy social gatherings. "I am not much of a dancer," he admitted, with a self-deprecating smile. "But I figured you could use a break from the ranch, and it would be good for people in town to see us together, see that you have got support. Might make Robert think twice about causing trouble." Marianne agreed, though she was not sure if she was more excited or nervous about spending an evening with Caleb in a social setting. She had exactly one good dress, a simple blue cotton that Catherine had made for her. And she spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to fix her hair into something presentable. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was waiting by the door. He had cleaned up too, shaving and putting on a fresh shirt that brought out the gray of his eyes. The way he looked at her, with open admiration that he did not try to hide, made her feel beautiful in a way she had never experienced before. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," Marianne managed, her cheeks heating. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The ride into town was pleasant in the cooling evening air. The dance was being held in the church hall, and it was already crowded with ranchers, townspeople, and miners from the surrounding area. A small band played enthusiastically, if not particularly skillfully, and couples swirled around the floor in various states of competence. Mrs. Patterson from the general store greeted them warmly and introduced Marianne to several other women. Sheriff Garrett gave them a friendly nod from where he stood near the refreshment table, and to Marianne's relief, there was no sign of Robert Henshaw. True to his word, Caleb was not an accomplished dancer, but he was game to try. They stumbled through a few reels and waltzes, laughing at their mistakes. Other men asked Marianne to dance as well, respectable townsmen who had heard about her situation and wanted to show their support. She accepted graciously, but she found herself constantly looking for Caleb, seeking him out in the crowd. About halfway through the evening, she was standing by the refreshment table catching her breath when a voice behind her made her freeze. "So you finally came out of hiding." She turned to find Robert standing there, a cup of punch in his hand. He was not as drunk as she had seen him before, but his eyes had that mean glitter that made her want to step back. "I am not hiding," Marianne said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am simply living my life." "On my property," Robert said, "with your hired gun keeping watch." "Caleb is a ranch hand, not a gunman," Marianne said, "and the property belongs to both of us, as you well know." Robert moved closer, and Marianne became aware that they were in a relatively quiet corner, away from the main crowd. "I could make you an offer, he said. "Buy out your share for a fair price. Then you could go back to St. Louis or wherever, start fresh without all this trouble." "I do not want to sell," Marianne said. "Catherine wanted me to have this land, and I intend to keep it." Robert's expression hardened. "Your sister was a fool. She threw away a perfectly good life because she could not appreciate what she had. Is that what you are going to do? Throw away a generous offer because of some sentimental notions about keeping a promise to a dead woman?" Anger flared in Marianne's chest. "Do not talk about Catherine that way. She was worth 10 of you, and she deserved so much better than what you gave her." Robert's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard. "You do not know anything about my marriage or what your sister was like. She was cold and ungrateful, and she turned bitter when she realized this ranch was not going to make us rich. So do not stand there acting like she was some kind of saint." "Let go of me," Marianne said, trying to pull away. But Robert's grip was iron, and she could see people starting to notice the confrontation. Then suddenly, Caleb was there, moving between them with the fluid grace of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. His hand closed around Robert's wrist, not roughly, but with enough pressure to make the other man release Marianne. "The lady asked you to let go," Caleb said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made several nearby conversations stop. Robert tried to pull free, but Caleb held firm. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, some unspoken challenge passing between them. Then Robert jerked away and stepped back, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is not over," he said for what seemed like the 100th time. "You two have made a powerful enemy." "All we have done is claim what legally belongs to Miss Fletcher," Caleb said. "If you have got a problem with that, take it up with the judge." Robert stormed out of the hall, leaving a wake of whispers and speculation behind him. Sheriff Garrett appeared at Caleb's elbow. "That looked like it was about to get ugly," the lawman observed. "He grabbed Miss Fletcher's arm," Caleb said. "I just made sure he let go." Garrett nodded slowly. "I will have a word with Robert. Remind him that assault is a crime even when it is against your dead wife's sister, but you two should be careful. Robert has friends, and some of them are not as concerned with the law as they ought to be." They left the dance shortly after, the evening's enjoyment soured by the confrontation. On the ride home, Marianne was quiet, processing everything that had happened. When they reached the ranch, she dismounted and started to lead Daisy toward the barn, but Caleb stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Are you all right?" he asked. "He did not hurt you, did he?" "No," Marianne said. "Just bruised my wrist a little. It will be fine." But Caleb carefully took her hand and pushed up her sleeve, revealing the red marks where Robert had gripped her. His jaw tightened with anger. "This is not acceptable," he said. "You should not have to live in fear of that man." "I know," Marianne said, "but what choice do I have? He is not going to give up, and I cannot afford to hire armed guards or fight a legal battle." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, still holding her hand. His thumb brushed gently over her wrist, and Marianne felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. "There might be another option," Caleb said slowly, "but it would require you to trust me." "I do trust you," Marianne said immediately. "You have given me no reason not to." Caleb looked up at her, his gray eyes searching her face. "If we were married, your share of the property would come under my protection. Robert would have no legal claim to it, and he would not be able to force you out or intimidate you without going through me first." Marianne stared at him, certain she must have misheard. "You are asking me to marry you?" "I am proposing a solution," Caleb said carefully. "A practical arrangement that would benefit us both. You would get protection and help running the ranch. I would get a home and a future. It does not have to be. That is, we could keep things respectful and proper, separate rooms, if that is what you want." Marianne's heart was pounding so hard she could barely think. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, wanted the security and companionship he was offering, but another part was hurt and disappointed. A practical arrangement. Separate rooms. This was not a proposal born of love or passion. It was a business transaction. "I need to think about it," she said quietly, pulling her hand away. Caleb nodded, something like disappointment flickering across his face before he shuddered it. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless." They tended the horses in awkward silence and then went their separate ways, Caleb to the barn, Marianne to the house. She lay awake most of the night turning his words over in her mind. It made sense logically. Marriage would solve many of her problems and give her the security she desperately needed. And if she was being honest with herself, the thought of being married to Caleb was not unappealing. She admired him, trusted him, was attracted to him. Could that be enough foundation for a marriage? But she did not want a marriage of convenience. She wanted what Catherine had hoped for when she married Robert. A partnership based on love and respect, not just practical necessity. And she could not tell if Caleb felt anything for her beyond duty and perhaps a mild affection. The next morning she was exhausted and emotionally wrung out. Caleb was already working when she emerged from the house, and he greeted her with his usual courtesy but did not mention the previous night's conversation. They worked side by side as always, but there was a new tension between them that had not been there before. 2 days passed in this uncomfortable state. Then, on the third morning, Marianne woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted out of bed and ran to the window. In the pre-dawn darkness, she could see flames licking up the side of the barn. Her heart stopped. Caleb was in there. She ran outside without bothering to dress properly, still in her nightgown with a shawl thrown over her shoulders. The heat from the fire was intense, even from several yards away. She could hear the horses screaming in terror inside. "Caleb!" she shouted. "Caleb, where are you?" He emerged from the barn leading his paint and Daisy, both animals wild-eyed with fear. His face was blackened with smoke and he was coughing hard. "The mule," he gasped, "could not get to him. Fire started in the back stall." Without thinking, Marianne grabbed a bucket and started running toward the well. Caleb caught her arm. "It is too late," he said. "The whole structure is going to go. We need to get back before it collapses." As if to punctuate his words, there was a groaning crack and part of the roof caved in. Sparks shot into the air, and Marianne felt tears streaming down her face. The barn was where they stored everything: tools, feed, supplies, and Sam the mule was still inside. They spent the next hour hauling water to keep the fire from spreading to the house and other buildings. By the time the sun rose, the barn was a smoking ruin. Marianne sat on the ground, filthy and exhausted, staring at the destruction. Everything she and Caleb had worked for seemed to be literally going up in smoke. Caleb sat down beside her, and they did not speak for a long time. Finally, he said quietly, "This was not an accident." Marianne turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I smelled kerosene when I first woke up," Caleb said. "And the fire started in 3 different places at once. Someone set this deliberately." The implication hit Marianne like a physical blow. "Robert!" "I cannot prove it," Caleb said. "But yes, I would bet money it was him or someone he hired." Fury rose in Marianne, hot and cleansing. She had tried to be reasonable, tried to handle this situation with dignity and respect for the law, but Robert had crossed a line. He had destroyed her property and nearly killed Caleb and the animals. "We need to tell the sheriff," she said. "We will," Caleb agreed. "But without proof, there is not much he can do, and Robert will just deny it." Marianne was quiet for a moment, then she stood up and turned to face Caleb. "I will marry you," she said. "If the offer is still open, I will marry you." Caleb stood as well, his expression cautious. "You do not have to make that decision based on this. We will rebuild the barn, and—" "I am not deciding because of the barn," Marianne interrupted. "I am deciding because I am tired of being afraid. I'm tired of Robert thinking he can terrorize me into giving up. And I am deciding because over the past 2 months, you have shown me more kindness and respect than I have ever known from any man. If you still want a practical arrangement, then yes, I accept." Something blazed in Caleb's eyes, something that looked almost like hope. "What if I do not want just a practical arrangement?" Marianne's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Caleb stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I mean that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about helping a woman in trouble. I have been trying to be respectful, trying not to take advantage of your situation, but the truth is, Marianne, I care about you. More than I should, more than is probably wise, and the thought of you as my wife, my real wife, not just in name, that is what I want, if you will have me." Marianne felt tears spring to her eyes again, but these were different. These were tears of relief and joy. "I care about you too," she admitted. "I have been trying not to because I did not think you felt the same way, but yes, Caleb, yes, I will have you. For real." He kissed her then, and it was everything she had secretly dreamed of, gentle but passionate, tender but claiming. His arms came around her, and she melted into him, feeling safer and more at home than she had in years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably clean up before we go to town," he said with a wry smile. "I do not think the preacher will marry us if we show up covered in soot." Marianne laughed. the sound bright and free. No, probably not. They washed and changed, then saddled the horses and rode into Copper Springs. Their first stop was the sheriff's office where they reported the fire and Caleb's suspicions about arson. Sheriff Garrett was sympathetic but confirmed what they already knew. Without evidence, there was little he could do. "I will talk to Robert," he promised. "Put the fear of the law into him. But you two should be careful. If he did this once, he might try again." "That is actually why we are here," Caleb said, taking Marianne's hand. "We are going to get married. Today, if possible." Garrett's eyebrows shot up, but then he smiled. "Well, that is good news. Congratulations to you both. The preacher should be at the church this time of day." They found Reverend Thompson working in the church garden. He was a kindly older man who had presided over Catherine's funeral, and he was delighted to hear about their plans. "I have always believed the Lord brings people together in His own time," he said. "Would you like to be married right now? Or would you prefer to wait and have a proper ceremony with guests?" Marianne looked at Caleb, and they shared a smile. "Now," she said, "we do not need anything fancy." The ceremony was simple and brief, conducted in the small church with only Mrs. Patterson and Sheriff Garrett as witnesses. But when Caleb slipped a simple gold band, his mother's ring, he told her quietly, onto her finger, and pledged to love and protect her for the rest of his life, Marianne felt as if she was experiencing something sacred and profound. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, and Caleb kissed her, Marianne felt the last piece of her broken heart slot back into place. She was no longer alone. She had a partner, someone who would stand beside her against whatever came next. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, a small luxury, but one that felt important. In the privacy of their room with the door locked and the world shut out, they came together with a combination of tenderness and passion that left Marianne breathless and amazed. "I love you," Caleb whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "I know this happened fast, but I mean it. I love you, Marianne Thornton." "I love you too," Marianne said, the words feeling both strange and utterly right on her tongue. "And I am not afraid anymore, not with you beside me." They returned to the ranch the next morning to face the daunting task of rebuilding. The barn was a total loss, but the other buildings were intact, and the animals, except for poor Sam, had survived. Over the next weeks, Caleb worked from dawn to dark constructing a new barn while Marianne managed the house and the animals and started planning for the future. News of their marriage spread quickly through the community. Some people were shocked by the speed of it, but most were supportive. Mrs. Patterson organized a barn raising, bringing together ranchers and townspeople to help with the construction. Even Sheriff Garrett showed up with his tools to lend a hand. Robert predictably was furious when he heard. He showed up at the ranch one final time, this time with a lawyer in tow. The lawyer was an oily man named Simmons who tried to argue that Marianne's marriage had somehow invalidated Catherine's will. Caleb listened patiently to his arguments, then invited both men into the house. He served them coffee while Marianne sat beside him, and together they calmly dismantled every legal point Simmons tried to make. "The will is valid," Caleb said. "The marriage does not change that. The only difference now is that Miss Fletcher, Mrs. Thornton, has a husband to help her maintain and defend her property, which means you will not be bullying her or trying to drive her off anymore." "Furthermore," Marianne added, "we have witnesses who can testify to the fire that destroyed our barn. And if any other unfortunate accidents happen, we will not hesitate to pursue legal action and criminal charges." Robert's face was purple with rage, but even he could see he was beaten. He stormed out, his lawyer trailing behind him, and they never came back. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch began to thrive under Caleb's experienced management and Marianne's determined efforts. They expanded the cattle herd, improved the irrigation for the vegetable garden, and even added a few chickens to replace the ones they had lost. More importantly, they built a life together. Caleb was everything Marianne had never dared dream of in a husband: patient, kind, hardworking, and deeply devoted to her happiness. He made her laugh with his dry wit, comforted her when memories of Catherine brought tears, and held her through the hot Arizona nights with a tenderness that never failed to move her. Marianne discovered that she loved being married to Caleb, loved the intimacy and partnership they shared. She loved the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, the way he always saved her the best parts of whatever they ate, the way he asked her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listened to her answers. In October, she realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. Joy at the thought of having Caleb's child, terror at the memories of how childbirth had affected so many women she had known. But Caleb was over the moon with happiness, and his confidence helped ease her fears. "You are strong," he told her, his hand resting gently on her still flat belly. "You survived Robert's harassment, a barn fire, and learning to run a ranch from scratch. You can handle this too, and I will be right here with you every step of the way." The pregnancy was easier than Marianne had feared. She felt sick in the mornings for the first few months, but Caleb was endlessly patient, bringing her dry toast and weak tea until the nausea passed. As her belly grew, he took over more of the heavy ranch work, insisting that she focus on staying healthy and resting. The winter of 1878 to 1879 was mild by Arizona standards, which everyone said was a blessing. Marianne spent long evenings sitting by the fire with Caleb, sewing baby clothes while he read aloud from books they borrowed from the lending library in town. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories from their pasts, making plans for their future, building the kind of deep understanding that comes from truly knowing another person. In March of 1879, Marianne went into labor. Mrs. Patterson came out to the ranch to serve as midwife, and Caleb spent the entire labor pacing outside the bedroom, refusing to go more than a few feet from the door. When Mrs. Patterson finally called him in to meet his son, a healthy, squalling baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes, Caleb wept openly. "Thank you," he kept saying, kissing Marianne's sweaty forehead over and over. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for him. Thank you for everything." They named the baby Thomas, after Caleb's father, and he was the light of both their lives. Marianne discovered that she loved being a mother almost as much as she loved being Caleb's wife. Watching her strong, capable husband transform into a gentle, devoted father only made her love him more. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Caleb's herd management skills increased their cattle numbers, and Marianne's careful budgeting ensured they were always able to meet their expenses with money left over for improvements and savings. They hired a young hand named Miguel to help with the heavy work, and he proved to be both trustworthy and hardworking. In the summer of 1880, Marianne discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less afraid, buoyed by the memory of Thomas's birth and by Caleb's unwavering support. Their daughter arrived in February of 1881, a tiny, perfect girl they named Catherine, in honor of the sister who had made all of this possible. Holding her daughter in her arms, Marianne felt tears streaming down her face. "I wish Catherine could see this," she whispered. "I wish she could know how much her gift meant, how it saved my life and gave me everything I ever wanted." "I think she knows," Caleb said softly, his arm around her shoulders as they looked down at their children, Thomas playing quietly on the floor, baby Catherine sleeping in her mother's arms. "I think she is watching over all of us, happy that you found joy after so much grief. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that tested their water supply, harsh winters that took a toll on the cattle, illnesses that swept through the family and required all their strength to overcome. But through it all, Marianne and Caleb faced each challenge together, their love and partnership only growing stronger with each passing year. Robert Henshaw faded into the background of their lives. They heard through town gossip that he had drunk himself to death in the winter of 1882, found frozen in a ditch outside of town. Marianne felt a complex mix of emotions at the news: pity for the waste of a life, relief that he could no longer threaten them, and sadness for what might have been if he had been a different kind of man. With Robert's death, his half of the property reverted to creditors who were eager to sell. Caleb and Marianne, after years of careful saving, were able to purchase it for a reasonable price. At last, the ranch was fully theirs, with no clouds hanging over their ownership. In 1883, Marianne gave birth to their third child, another son they named Jacob. And in 1885, their fourth and final child, a daughter named Rose, completed their family. The years blurred together in the way that happy times do. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible young man who showed all the signs of being a natural rancher. Catherine inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, and she was already talking about becoming a teacher when she grew up. Jacob was wild and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief and keeping his parents on their toes. And little Rose was the baby everyone doted on, sweet-natured and affectionate. On a warm evening in June of 1890, Marianne sat on the porch of the house that had once belonged to her sister. 12 years had passed since the day Robert had tried to force her away, 12 years since a dusty cowboy had ridden into her life and changed everything. The house had been expanded and improved over the years. They had added rooms to accommodate their growing family, painted the exterior a cheerful yellow, and planted trees for shade. The barn, the second barn, built after the fire, was sturdy and well-maintained. The cattle herd had grown to over 100 head, providing a comfortable income. The land itself seemed to have responded to their love and hard work, becoming more productive with each passing year. Caleb came out of the barn and spotted her on the porch. His hair was starting to show traces of gray at the temples, and there were more lines around his eyes, but to Marianne he was just as handsome as the day they met. He climbed the steps and settled into the chair beside her, taking her hand in his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Marianne said. "Catherine, and how she saved my life by bringing me here. How you saved me by refusing to let Robert bully me. How we built all of this together." She gestured at the ranch, the children playing in the yard, the life they had created. "You saved yourself," Caleb said. "I just gave you a hand up. Everything else, the ranch, the family, the life we have, that is all you, your strength, your determination, your love." "Our strength," Marianne corrected. "Our determination, our love. I could not have done any of this without you." Thomas called to them from the yard, where he was teaching his younger siblings how to rope a wooden fence post. Catherine was surprisingly good at it, much to her brother's chagrin. Caleb laughed and called back encouragement. "Did you ever imagine this?" Marianne asked. "When you were drifting through Colorado and New Mexico, did you imagine you would end up here with a wife and 4 children and a successful ranch?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "No," he admitted. "After we lost the ranch in Texas, I figured I would spend the rest of my life as a hired hand, moving from place to place with no real home. I had given up on the idea of having a family or putting down roots. And then I saw you on that porch, scared but defiant, and something in me just knew. This was where I was supposed to be. You were who I was supposed to find." Marianne lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles. "I am so grateful you found me. I am so grateful for all of this." "So am I," Caleb said, "every single day." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Marianne reflected on how far she had come. She had arrived in this territory a frightened, grieving girl with nothing but the clothes on her back and a dying sister's promise. She had faced down a bully who tried to steal her inheritance and had nearly lost everything to fire and intimidation. But she had also found love in the most unexpected place. She had found courage she did not know she possessed. She had found a home, a family, a purpose, and through it all, she had found herself, the woman she was meant to become. The years continued to unfold in blessings both large and small. Thomas eventually married a local rancher's daughter and built his own spread on the far side of their property. Catherine did indeed become a teacher, Beloved by her students in the Copper Springs schoolhouse, Jacob joined the Territorial Rangers for a few exciting years before returning to help run the family ranch. And Rose grew into a gentle soul who loved animals and eventually became known throughout the territory for her skill in training horses. Caleb and Marianne grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They saw Arizona achieve statehood, saw the railroad extend its reach into previously isolated territories, saw the wild frontier of their youth slowly transform into something more settled and civilized. But some things never changed. The ranch remained the center of their lives, a testament to Catherine's love and Caleb's intervention and Marianne's determination. The house on the hill, expanded and improved but fundamentally the same, remained their sanctuary, the place where a frightened young woman had found safety and a drifting cowboy had found home. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around bearing gifts and good wishes. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. And in the midst of it all, Caleb pulled Marianne onto the makeshift dance floor under the stars. "You know I am still not much of a dancer," he said with a wry smile. "I know," Marianne said laughing, "but I do not care. Dance with me anyway." As they swayed together to the music, Marianne closed her eyes and remembered that night so many years ago at the church social. The fear she had felt, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that somehow everything would work out. And now here they were, surrounded by the life they had built together, the children they had raised, the legacy they would leave behind. "I love you," she whispered to Caleb. "Today, tomorrow, and forever?" "Forever," Caleb agreed, his arms tightening around her. "That sounds about right." The music played on and the stars wheeled overhead, and on a ranch in Arizona that had once been the site of heartbreak and conflict but was now filled with love and laughter, two people who had found each other against all odds continued their dance through life, together, as they would always be, until the very end of their days and beyond into whatever came next. Their story became the stuff of local legend, the tale of how a determined woman and a chivalrous cowboy had defied a bully, survived hardship, and built something beautiful from the ashes of loss. Young couples would sometimes ride out to the ranch just to see the place, to hear Mrs. Patterson or one of the other old-timers tell the story of that day when Caleb Thornton had stopped Robert Henshaw cold and given Marianne Fletcher the sanctuary she so desperately needed. And when people asked Marianne and Caleb for the secret to their long and happy marriage, they always gave the same answer: trust, respect, partnership, and a love that grew stronger with every challenge they faced together. In 1915, Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 63, surrounded by his family. Marianne held his hand as he slipped away, whispering her love and gratitude for the life they had shared. She mourned him deeply but not bitterly, grateful for every moment they had been given. She lived another 7 years, watching her grandchildren grow and helping to run the ranch that had been her salvation. And when she finally followed Caleb into whatever lay beyond, she went with a smile on her face and peace in her heart, knowing that she had lived a full and meaningful life. The ranch stayed in the family for generations after that, passed down through Thomas's line. And though times changed and the world moved on, the story remained, a testament to courage, kindness, and the transformative power of love that endures through all circumstances. It was a story that began with fear and uncertainty but ended in triumph and joy, a story of how sanctuary, freely given, can become a foundation for something far greater than anyone might have imagined. A story of two souls who found each other in the vast expanse of the American West and built a life worth remembering. And that story, passed down through the years, continued to inspire those who heard it. A reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can appear in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes it arrives on horseback, dusty and travel-worn, but ready to stand between danger and those who need protection. Sometimes it comes in the form of a stranger who sees injustice and refuses to look away. For Marianne and Caleb, it came in the form of each other. Two people from different worlds who met at exactly the right moment and chose to walk the rest of their path together. And in doing so, they proved that love, when built on a foundation of mutual respect and partnership, can overcome any obstacle and create a legacy that endures long after the individuals themselves have passed into memory. The sun set over the Arizona desert as it had for countless years, painting the sky in brilliant colors. And on the land that had once witnessed conflict but had become a place of peace and plenty, the story of Marianne and Caleb lived on, a testament to the enduring power of sanctuary, courage, and love.